The US military says it will begin a blockade of all ships entering or exiting Iranian ports after peace talks in Pakistan failed to reach a deal. Oil surges back over $100 a barrel as the US and Iran head toward an escalating confrontation in the vital Strait of Hormuz.
Shall we have a look at this morning's front pages? And lots of them leading with President Trump's threat to blockade Iranian ports following those failed US-Iran peace talks in Pakistan over the weekend. The Eye here leading with the possible consequences for us here in the UK, writing that there's an inflation warning for Britain as uncertainty over oil prices deepens.
Also tonight, the United States begins its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. What will it achieve? Outrage after President Trump criticises the Pope and then posts this AI image of himself online. It has now been deleted.
President Trump says Iran wants a deal to end the war very badly as a US blockade of the country's ports takes effect.
We can't let a country blackmail or extort the world, because that's what they're doing. They're really blackmailing the world. We're not going to let that happen.
The failure of peace talks over the weekend has caused another surge in oil prices as Iran calls the blockade piracy and threatens to retaliate.
The United States began its blockade of Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz 3 hours ago. Iran has threatened to retaliate after the blockade was announced following the breakdown of peace talks at the weekend. President Trump has warned that if Iran tries to breach the blockade using its fast attack ships, they will be eliminated. Since the start of the war, only ships given permission by Iran have been able to sail through the vitally important shipping channel. It has meant that Iran has continued to sell its own oil freely despite the war. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports.
For weeks, the Strait of Hormuz has been largely closed to shipping, their owners unwilling to risk Iranian attack. But now America's imposing its own blockade. US commanders say any vessels leaving or entering Iranian ports risk interception, diversion and capture. Donald Trump said that also included Iran's fast attack ships. If any of these ships come anywhere close to our blockade, he wrote, they will be immediately eliminated.
Right now we have a blockade. They're doing no business. I didn't like seeing boats come out if they were doing business with Iran, but if they weren't, no boats came out. So now Iran is doing absolutely no business, and we're going to keep it that way very easily.
Israel's prime minister told his cabinet he backed the blockade, but elsewhere the US had little support.
Welcome to the statement, Prime Minister.
Sir Keir Starmer told MPs the UK would take no part in the US action and called instead for freedom of navigation to be restored to sustain what he called the highly fragile ceasefire.
My guide from the start of this conflict has always been our national interest. That's why we stayed out of the war and why we continue to stay out of the war. And that is why we are working now to restore freedom of navigation in the Middle East, because that is squarely in our national interest.
To that end, he said he'd co-host a summit with France this week to discuss plans to keep the strait open after the war ends. The US blockade came after talks at the weekend in Pakistan ended without agreement. The US trying now to put fresh economic pressure on Iran by choking off its energy exports that have continued throughout the war.
سخنگوی قرارگاه مرکزی خاتم الانبیا
On Iranian state TV, a presenter quoted a military spokesman saying no port in the Gulf would be safe if Iran's ports were attacked. America's restriction on the movement of maritime vessels in international waters is, he said, an illegal act and an example of piracy. All the while, fighting continued in Lebanon, Israel's forces attacking what they said were pro-Iranian Hezbollah fighters, only hours before Lebanese and Israeli diplomats are due to meet in Washington for talks to try to end the war. James Landale, BBC News.
Well, a short time ago, Donald Trump said 34 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz yesterday, the most since the war began. But what happens now? The price of oil has risen again to more than $100 a barrel. How effective will the US blockade be, and what will the result be? Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
This is Sepang Navy Station. You must alter course and go back to the Indian Ocean immediately. If you don't obey my order, you will be targeted. Out.
This is Coalition Warship 121, engaged in transit passage in accordance with international law.
A standoff last weekend between two navies, Iran and the US. It passed off peacefully, but the Iranian partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is an escalating crisis. Iran has stopped 2,000 tankers from exiting the strait. It's threatened to charge tankers a toll, while allowing Iranian oil tankers freedom of movement. In response, the US blockade is focusing on Iranian ports, hoping to pressure Iran by bottling up its cargo ships. It's warned off Iran's ships from entering the strait or risk possible interception, diversion, or capture by the US Navy. This is how few ships are getting through the strait, just 4 since midnight. Iran has a lot of Gulf ports, but the US Navy only needs to wait offshore, out in the Arabian Sea. Pretty similar, in fact, to what the US did off Venezuela last year.
We can pick the location to minimize the risk to force. We can pick the targets to minimize the kind of risk to mission, make sure we're getting the right ones. We don't have to take every ship. You just have to take enough ships, seize them, hold them, take their cargo, take the ship.
This recent social media post from Iran regime supporters shows how President Trump's actions and Iran's reaction have driven up the oil price. Iran's parliamentary speaker has tweeted a warning. With this blockade, he said, those petrol pump prices are about to go a whole lot higher. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Let's go to Washington now. North America editor Sarah Smith is there. And the president's just been speaking, hasn't he? He called an impromptu press conference. What was he saying?
Well, what people most wanted to know was whether or not the talks with Iran are going to restart. And he said that they had already had a call from the other side, as he put it, meaning Iran, saying they want to do a deal very badly indeed. Now, Donald Trump often claims that, but he did go on to tell us that they had managed to agree a number of things in the talks at the weekend, but the sticking point was over Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon. And Donald Trump has always said Iran will never be able to develop a nuclear weapon. They wouldn't commit to not doing so, and that's what broke the talks up. So Donald Trump thinks he can get a deal on that, and he wants to get all of the enriched uranium that could be used to make a nuclear bomb out of Iran and for the US to take possession of it. He calls it the dust and says that the US will get it, whether the Iranians hand it over or whether the Americans have to go in and get it. And he was also asked about that blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and his claim that other countries wanted to help the United States with that. He said he didn't need any help, but several other countries certainly had offered to do so, but he declined to name them, saying that maybe tomorrow he'll tell us which countries it is that he says are going to help him out with that blockade.
Sarah Smith, our North America editor, thank you. So with the US embargo now in place in the Strait of Hormuz, what is the likely economic impact going to be of it all? Our business editor, Simon Jack, is with me. What's expected?
Well, the most obvious transmission method economically is through the oil price. And yes, oil prices are back above $100 a barrel, but only just. And what is quite odd about this is that this looks like a massive escalation, but the markets haven't really reacted. And there are 3 reasons I'm getting for that. One is slight amount of headline fatigue. You get one post, then you get another post. How is this embargo going to work? Is it going to work? Blockade going to work at all? The second one is that a lot of people see this as a power play with China. At the moment, most of that Iranian oil that has been let through is going to China. By blockading it, saying the Iranian vessels can't get out either, it's basically putting pressure on China to put pressure on Iran to come to the table. And third, people point out that whatever the escalation in terms of rhetoric, the ceasefire, such as it is, between the US and Iran is still holding. So what does that all mean for people here in the UK? Well, we had our new petrol prices and diesel prices, and yes, they have gone up for the 43rd day in a row, by the way, but only just. And the communication we're getting from people like the RAC is this might be it, unless it goes much, much further. So most of the pain may be in it, and we might begin to see them top out from here.
Simon Japp, thank you. There's been widespread condemnation after President Trump posted an AI-generated image of himself as Jesus on social media last night after he criticised the Pope, calling him terrible and weak. The Pope, who's American and has been openly critical about the war in Iran, says he's not afraid of the Trump administration. A short time ago, the social media picture was deleted. Here's our religion editor, Aleem Maqbool.
The US president bathed in golden light, apparently healing a sick man. Many saw the image as blasphemous. Donald Trump has now deleted it, but said he wasn't trying to be Jesus.
I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one.
Overnight, the president did also launch a scathing verbal attack on the Pope.
I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He's a man that doesn't think that we should be toying with a country that wants a nuclear weapon so they can blow up the world. I'm not a fan of Pope Leo.
It's all come because of the Pope's clear and vocal opposition to the war in Iran. Throughout recent weeks, including in his Easter message, he's talked of unjustifiable civilian deaths. On a flight starting a trip to Africa, Pope Leo was asked for his response to the president's posts and insults.
I do not look at my role as being political, politician. I don't want to get into a debate with him. I don't think that the message of the gospel is meant to be abused in the way that some people are doing. And I will continue to speak out loud against war, looking to promote peace.
Donald Trump's now said Pope Leo was only elected because of him. He posted this image during the conclave last year. But there are suggestions that in this confrontation, even some of his supporters think he's gone too far. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News.
OK, well, let's move on now to the Middle East. And the US naval blockade on Iran began earlier this afternoon. It comes after the weekend's peace talks broke down. It also coincides with an extraordinary row over the Iran conflict between President Trump and Pope Leo. The blockade on Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz began with a threat from the president. Any Iranian attack vessels approaching the blockade, he said, would be immediately sunk. Here's our US correspondent, Dan Rivers.
Amid one of the worst ever global energy shocks, a Middle East war and now a religious controversy, the president thought this was the perfect moment for a publicity stunt.
This doesn't look staged, does it?
They're all your favorites.
Fast food to land the message of tax cuts on tips. But this was what everyone was talking about. Donald Trump's post appearing to show him as Jesus. Tonight, it had been removed from his social media as he tried in vain to defend it.
I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor. It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better.
Despite his attempts to reassure the world his plan on Iran is working.
I can tell you that we've been called by the other side. They'd like to make a deal very badly, very badly.
Last warning, last warning.
In the Gulf, this is the reality. A tense standoff between the Iranian and American navies as the United States starts its own blockade of Iranian oil.
If you don't obey my order, you will be targeted.
This is Coalition Warship 121. No challenges attended to you.
Iranian TV broadcast footage of one of its Navy vessels squaring up to an American warship. The rhetoric belligerent, but so far it's not been backed up with hostile action.
I'm ready to open fire on them without any warning.
A marine traffic jam is building up on either side of the Strait of Hormuz. The trickle of ships the Iranians have allowed through has now ended after the US naval blockade started today. But Donald Trump's opened up a new front in his global power flexing, this time against the Vatican, targeting the Pope, who criticised his threat to annihilate the Iranian civilization.
There's nothing to apologize for. He's wrong. The other thing is he didn't like what we're doing with respect to Iran.
His criticism had previously drawn a restrained but firm pushback from the pontiff as he travelled to North Africa.
I don't want to get into a debate with him. I don't think that the message of the gospel is meant to be abused in the way that some people are doing.
Is this a just war?
No. But some of his bishops in America were more forthright in an interview with CBS.
We negotiate with bombs.
Critical of this administration's glamorized portrayal of war.
You called it sickening.
Is sickening. This is not who we are. We're better than this.
Some worry he's tarnished the great office of the presidency, today adding golden arches to the golden flourishes adorning the Oval Office. His critics accuse him of trivializing his position at a moment the world is looking for real leadership.
Well, let's go straight to Dan in Washington. Dan, very few clues from the president of how this might actually end.
None at all, Mary, no. I mean, there's no sense of any kind of fresh rounds of talks or any kind of diplomatic track, really, from those comments he made a few moments ago outside the Oval Office. If anything, it seems like this crisis is about to get more acute because China has now weighed in, effectively telling the US to sort of back off from their oil trade with Iran. The Chinese defense minister saying they expect others not to interfere in our affairs. And that gives the US Navy a real dilemma in imposing this sort of second blockade across a different part of the Straits. What are they going to do if a Chinese oil tanker approaches the US blockade? Are they going to let it through or are they going to turn it round? And if they turn it round, does that then risk drawing China into this or risking a sort of catastrophic escalation in the Gulf? There is no end in sight here, even though Donald Trump is trying to say, look, there's loads of oil tankers coming to the United States. We've got plenty of capacity. In reality, the price of oil is up and it's going to stay there.
OK, Dan Rivers in Washington, thank you. Well, here in the Commons today, Keir Starmer reiterated his anger at the economic effect of the Iranian conflict on British households. He told MPs that British bill payers are fed up, as he put it, with international events pushing up their energy costs. Well, our economics editor Joel Hills is outside the Treasury for us this evening. Joel, what does he propose to do about this?
We don't yet know, Mary. There is a suggestion that help is on the way. We don't yet know what form it will take. It is, though, the signals suggest going to be limited and targeted at those the government judges need it most. There is still the hope that some sort of peace deal will fall out of the sky, but the problem here is that lasting economic damage seems to have already been caused. The rise in petrol prices is really just the start. A shortage of jet fuel looks set to affect the travel and tourism industry this summer. Food prices look likely to rise in the months ahead as a shortage of fertiliser bites. And of course, we've seen a surge, haven't we, already in mortgage rates, which will take money out of the pockets of hundreds of thousands of homeowners in the months to come. Now, the market price of oil jumped back above $100 a barrel today after the failure of the talks at the weekend. The price of gas rose too. Important that because it's the UK's great vulnerability. We use so much of it to heat our homes, to generate electricity. Indeed, the Resolution Foundation estimates that in the next 12 months, the typical household in the UK will be almost £500 a year worse off. The government's under pressure to act. The last government, of course, subsidised the energy bills of every household in the UK. Last time there was an energy shock. Today, Jeremy Hunt, Chancellor at the time, said there was no need and actually no room for the government to be as generous this time.
Even if Rachel Reeves wanted to introduce a huge universal package like the energy price guarantee, the markets wouldn't allow it. So the public are going to have to get used to the fact that governments can't intervene.
This year began with the hope and indeed the expectation that living standards would finally start to rise in a way that voters began to notice. I think that hope looks very forlorn currently.
But before all that, we're going to return to the Iran conflict and the latest report from inside Iran by our international editor, Emma Murphy. At the weekend, all eyes in Tehran were on the peace talks in Islamabad between senior US and Iranian figures. But sadly, as we know, These broke down with no sign of a resolution. With the existing ceasefire holding by a thread, Emma went out to meet people in Tehran who've suffered from the bombardment and are desperate for peace.
These are uncertain days. Neither full-scale war nor secure peace. A break in the bombardment has allowed for a return to the more usual rituals of life. And Tehran's Grand Bazaar is busy again.
We want peace. All of us, we want peace. But the situation is that I don't know what to say.
There had been a wish, rather than an expectation. The talks may deliver an easing of the sanctions which have contributed to the economic crisis in this country.
In my opinion, the situation isn't very good. Being in a state of war doesn't lead to good conditions in the economy, in relationships, in social interactions.
Two major wars, as well as internal division, have left their mark on this country. The consequences of war will be challenging, so will the consequences of peace.
It was here in the Grand Bazaar that the protests began as businesses began to struggle. The war has compounded the financial pressures. Business isn't good, Bibi tells me, and says she's several orphaned children to care for. At this age, I still have to come here and sit, she says. There is no escaping the human consequences of this war. These are some of the faces of the children killed in an American strike on their school in Minab on the first day.
Everyone wants peace. No one wants the war. War isn't good. We didn't start this war.
This ceasefire has offered something of a respite for those who have seen the worst of this war.
We saw very, very bad things. I can't show his face to you. I can show the face to you, but not film. One of my casualties is there. He's civilian. He's a worker, simple worker. But debris of roof had fallen on his face, and the face is ruined totally. Very handsome, young person. Sajjad, he's tailor, and he works
stitching,
and he works in his workplace. They repaired the right side, and they made a free flap from here. This is.
So you've used skin from the leg in order to fix the side of the face?
Skin plus muscle.
Skin and muscle. Yeah.
From here, plastic surgeons.
This is one of Tehran's main hospitals, and it took huge numbers of patients during the bombardment. The staff here had told me that the floor would shake when the bombs started to fall, and they'd run to the windows to look out to see, firstly, whether or not it was their neighbourhood that had been hit, secondly, how far away those hits were, so they could judge just how many patients they would get into the hospital. What was striking when I spoke with one of the senior doctors was his description that they didn't get as many casualties as they thought they would. That was because the nature of the strikes was so intense. Most people died instantly and didn't need to be brought to hospitals. There is no escaping the physical impact either. Rubble in their wake is the American-Israeli calling card. But it's not just their targets suffering damage. The Golestan Palace dates back to the 1700s. It's a UNESCO site, and its beauty has withstood hundreds of years, but not a blast wave. It will be rebuilt, broken shard by broken shard. It's something of a metaphor for this country as it waits to see what the future will bring. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Tehran.
And you can find more analysis from Emma, including her previous reports from inside Iran, on our website. Just head to itv.com/news.